Welcome. You're about to watch the replay of part three and the final discussion of Hard Conversations Are They Worth Having? We explored cultural and generational perspectives while having hard conversations. Enjoy the recording. All right. Well, welcome. Welcome to part three and our final panel discussion of Hard Conversations Are They Worth Having? So, in this series, like this specific part, we'll be exploring cultural and generational perspectives. Welcome. My name is Rasie. I am your host. I am a public speaker, a leadership growth champion, book coach, and three times best-selling author. I partner with organizations and post-secondary institutions in supporting leaders with starting with themselves, communicating with confidence, and using their stories to create meaningful impact. And this happens through keynote presentations, workshops, and facilitating panel discussions like this. I want to take a moment to honor the land from which I'm joining you from, the beautiful Sunshine Coast. It is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Shishal Nation and Squamish Nation. We offer this land acknowledgement to recognize the indigenous people. I'm just going to let Shelley in here, the indigenous people who have cared for these lands for such a long time, and also to remind ourselves that reconciliation is an ongoing practice. By grounding this event, part three of Hard Conversations Are They Worth Having, in this awareness, we honor the stories, the cultures, and contributions of Indigenous communities, and we commit to creating spaces that are inclusive, respectful, and rooted in truth. Thank you to my ancestors as well for paving the way, standing up for what they believe in, and using their voice for the greater good. As a result of their actions, I am here with you today, and I am very grateful for that. I'm going to invite everyone to pause for about a minute in this acknowledgement and also to show gratitude from the hearts of where we are right now, where you're joining from, and also from and where you've been, where you're from, what your roots are. So we'll take a minute just to be in that moment. Thank you for joining me in that. This event was birthed from many conversations that I've been having with leaders, either it's in coaching sessions and workshops or just common conversations like online, direct messages, or on Zoom calls. And in part one of Hard Conversations That Are Worth Having, we answered the question at a very broad scale, brought some incredible leaders on stage to have that conversation. And in part two, we focused on business and leadership. And a lot that came from that was around feedback, which is really cool to understand that hard conversations, having giving and receiving feedback can be a hard conversation. That was the one common theme that came from it. And this is part three of this series. A few of you in the room have joined us in part one, part two, or both. I welcome you and thank you for joining us as we learn and reflect on this, on growing this communication skill. All right, let's get to it. I invite you to use the chat if you can, or you can send me an email with your question. I'll have it open. And please come as you are into the space. Great things happen when we meet ourselves where we're at and pivot from there. You can kick back, you can take your shoes off, your socks off, you can grab a glass of water or beverage and sip on. I see Mark, you're sipping on. Thank you for showing us what's possible. And yeah, so in the next hour, we are going to explore cultural and generational perspectives when having hard conversations. I will introduce each of our panelists on stage or thought leaders who said yes to having this conversation with us. And thank you, each of you. I'm super, super grateful. And then we'll start off with the first question and get all warmed up. And please, please share your questions in the chat. Or you can, whenever I pause, you can unmute your mic. You can turn on your mic and ask any questions that you have to any one of us on stage. All right, so I'm going to start off with Shelley. So Shelley said yes to this conversation, and Shelley-Anne Vidal said yes to this conversation because she believes that it takes courage to have hard, challenging, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations. As someone who has been in leadership for more than 2 decades, she has seen firsthand the impact these conversations can have on relationships, teams, and organizational culture. While they aren't always easy, they're often where the greatest growth and learning happens. Next up is Andrea Welling. Andrea believes that young people, she said yes to this conversation because she believes that young people deserve leaders who know how to have courageous conversations with empathy, curiosity, and respect. Today's youth are growing up in incredible, diverse communities where cultural backgrounds and generational perspectives influence how they communicate, learn, and connect. And next up, we have Rohene Bouajram. Did I say it correctly? Oh, good. Oh, yay! Thank you, sis. So Rohene said yes. As someone on a mission to redefine leadership, any opportunity that allows her to collectively shift our mindsets and actions is something that she will always say yes to. Plus, anything I invite her to is always a big yes. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna go in the order of Shelley, Andrea, and then Rohene. So they're gonna briefly introduce themselves as they respond to the first question. And when we come to you, Andrea, I will repeat the question again, just because I always have that. You're like, oh, what's the question again? Because we get into it, you know. So Shelley, briefly introduce yourself and tell us about a hard conversation that you almost didn't have because of cultural upbringing. What
Sure,
happened? What did you learn? And how it changed the way you communicate today?
absolutely. Thanks so much, Rasie. I'm excited to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley-Anne Vidal. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an inclusive leadership coach, an author, a speaker, a community builder, a mother, and have about 15 years of experience in communications and encouraging empathy and purpose through leaders in higher ed, and also students as well. I believe that we can really have meaningful change by having courageous conversations that are rooted in curiosity and empathy and compassion. I have a nonprofit, which is called Act by Vidal Society, where I really help to do some community building and to create spaces where folks who typically are not necessarily seen or heard, I can work to amplify their voices so that they are more seen in community. And in terms of your question, that's a great question, Razzie. I was reflecting on a few conversations that came to mind, and I think when it comes to the cultural upbringing, the one that really stuck out the most is and as you know, I'm a published author, so I think the one that stuck out the most was having that conversation to let folks know that I wanted to have a baby on my own through IVF. And coming from a kind of religious family, Catholic family, thinking about like, what does that mean? As someone who's solo, unmarried, or a divorcee at the time, I should say, and wanting to really do this quote unquote on my own, which is not really on my own because obviously there's community involved. And I was really nervous about sharing that news with first my siblings and then my parents. I think growing up, I've been one of those kids who's pretty much always on the straight and narrow path, don't really ruffle too many feathers in terms of at home. I wasn't a rebellious child, so to speak. And so thinking about like what does this mean? I didn't have anybody else in my immediate family who chose to go down this path or this journey. And so would I be disappointing my parents? What about the stigma? Not only forget about myself, but on my family members, my mom, my dad, my siblings, what would people say? Um, but at the end of the day, I had to really reflect on knowing that our family was really rooted on family and acceptance. And, I thought long and hard about it and meditated on it, reflected on it. And then I decided to have that conversation with my mom first. And she was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. So some of my coworkers are doing that. The younger coworkers are doing it, and absolutely, you should do it." And I was like, "Oh, this is much easier than I thought it would be." And I was so glad that I, you know, chose to have that conversation so that earlier on in my journey in the process of motherhood, I would have the support of my family and my friends because it's not an easy journey. And what it taught me, again, it's not the first and it's not the last. My daughter is 4 years old now, so it's about 5 years ago that I embarked upon that journey with them. But it was again just reaffirming the importance of walking through courage, because I was scared, I had fear, but I took a step back, took a breath, I reflected, I looked at the situation, I had to think about my audience, that was part of it. And then yeah, I walked through the quote unquote fire, which wasn't that fiery in the end. And I'm so glad I did because, my daughter's besties with my mom now. They're like BFFs. So it's beautiful.
Oh, that is very, very brave, very brave. And thank you,
Thank you.
Shelley, for sharing that personal story with us. There's one thing you highlighted with family and acceptance, going back to the values of what you share with your family. And I love that you demonstrated that we can share, we can create these stories in our head of what could happen or what that person may say or not say, right? And we don't know until we do it, and we never have the full story. That's quite powerful. Thank you,
Thank you.
Shelley. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. We're gonna go to Andrea. Andrea, please briefly introduce yourself and tell us about a hard conversation that you almost didn't have because of your cultural upbringing.
Hey everyone, my name's Andrea Welling. I'm a business advisor and coach, and love working with entrepreneurs, especially women, and helping them be empowered, have more clients, have more time freedom, and just really contributing to the betterment of the world through small business. I really believe in the power of business to lead us in a maybe in a more positive global direction. Um, a little bit about conversation and my upbringing. Um, I think in my family, my dad was definitely the dominant figure, and he was definitely, kind of the one that knew everything, was kind of the boss. And I would sometimes challenge him, but sometimes I mean, it, we'd always have these debates, but it was always he was usually right. And so for me, when I was in a work situation, and maybe some of you have been there, I had to hire someone, and I had this gut feeling this was not the right person. But my boss was like, "Nope, this is who we need to hire." And I went ahead and I hired this person. And so this is where I didn't have the tough conversation, and regretted it. And then, sort of fast forward, having more difficult conversations around who I really did want on my team. And I decided that I really did need to stand up for myself. And I would say that really helped me have a strong team and had a team that was in alignment. I also sometimes had people, I remember having someone on my team, and I had to have a tough conversation, say, I don't think this opportunity works for you. Things are not working out. This was very difficult to do. But it was good because actually the person in the end, it wasn't the best opportunity for them. But it took a lot of, yes, my own courage and not worrying about what someone else was, trusting myself, trusting that I was making the right decision. And I think oftentimes we don't trust ourselves, or we've been socialized that we're not always right and that someone else is right. So, yeah, so I just wanted to share that one.
Yeah, it's the values piece is coming up again. I absolutely love that. And alignment is something that you value, especially in that specific story that you share with us, that lived experience, Andrea. And I want to point out that it's normal, like you shared this, to it's normal to regret not having the hard conversation. I think it's what you do next that really matters, right? And not staying in the past. I love that you did different from what you know and reflecting on that. Thank you, Andrea. I'll bring it over to Rohene.
Yeah,
Rohene, please introduce yourself and tell us about a hard conversation that you almost didn't have because of your cultural upbringing.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Rasie, and hello, everyone. I'm not going to say good morning or good afternoon because I feel like we might be in different time zones depending on where everyone is. It's just an honor to be here. My name's Rohene Bouajram. I go by she, her pronouns. I am an educator, a speaker, a coach, a consultant, who loves to bring artistic activations to really bridge conversations around leadership, whether that's my podcast or my doctorate right now, in which I'm developing a documentary, and then everything else in between in terms of the different perspectives that I love to bring based on living and studying across different parts of the continents in the world. When I think of a conversation, a difficult conversation, I have to take you back. Picture this. I'm about 23 years old. I'm standing behind a very tall mahogany desk, and we've been told by our supervisor that the vice president is coming down to our office to do a meet and greet. Up until that point, I'd been in the role for a couple of years, and it was exciting because if many of you remember that moment where the big boss is coming, it's a big deal. And so here I am, and everyone is kind of talking and chattering about what they're going to say because you only have probably 30 or 40 seconds of his attention. So he comes down, it comes across the mahogany desk. I'm standing behind there, and all I blurt out are all the problems that I see happening in the portfolio. And remember, 30 or 40 seconds. And so he says to me, fascinating. Schedule a meeting with me, and I'd love to hear your proposal of how to fix it. Now, I wasn't expecting that. And so what do I do after that quick encounter with him is I do nothing. I don't follow up, I don't schedule the meeting, and I don't pitch the proposal. And sadly, had I done that, things would have been different. And so that was a conversation that I didn't have. Now, underneath the surface, what was really going on was this continuous default operating system that had been programmed within me from living in a country. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and it was a country that was very much defined by segregation, racial segregation. It was very much defined by supremacy and inferiority. And it was very much defined by gender. Women only had a certain place, and you can guess where that place was. And so the default operating system that I had was this constant iteration that I needed to stay in my lane. Who did I think I was? And no one's going to listen to me. And that's kept going on and on. Now, thankfully, after learning that lesson multiple times of not really following through, I had to take a moment to heal myself. And what I can tell you, what I've learned from that experience has been that as much as it was absolutely nerve-wracking, to not only raise the problems but offer the solutions. Since then, having now spent over 20 years in higher education, also working with nonprofit and also corporations in my consulting and in entrepreneurship, I probably pitch myself and a solution at least once or twice a week. And I get rejected. And at the same time, I get supported and I get welcomed in. And so I've now started to learn that it's actually a great and fun experience to pitch the ideas. I have a beautiful brain that recognizes patterns. I have a beautiful brain that sees the problems clearly. What I had to learn within my body was how do I actually translate that in a way that people will say, oh my gosh, I want to hire you, whether it's for consulting or I want to hire you into a role. 3 of my jobs in my career, I manufactured, I created, and I pitched it. And it's my hope that as we continue to have this conversation, if you were like me at 25 years old, standing behind the mahogany desk, hopefully you'll realize that that path can absolutely shift and your default operating system does not have to stay the same. Thank you.
I'm just going to pause for a moment. Oh, Rohene, thank you. Thank you. I, you mentioned with healing, I definitely second that. It makes space for us to be able to hold onto that bravery and go for it, right? And I love that you said it's great and fun experience. That's a great takeaway. It's like it's not so hard. It's fun and great to go about it. And and it shows your story shows possibilities. Like what is possible when we say yes to having the conversation and knowing that hey, you might fall, you might not go the way that you wanted to, but we can get back up and keep going at it, regardless of the different perspectives that we're navigating. Thank you, Rohene. I want to get just want to know a little bit of what's going on in the audience. If you can give me an emoji of what you're feeling and how you are right now. Is there a question that you want to ask the panelists before we go on to the next question that we have planned? Okay. I love the hearts. Okay. All right. So we're doing good so far. We're doing good so far. That's good. Okay, all right. We'll keep going. And please do not hesitate to share your question in the chat, or at some point you can raise your hand, and when we pause, we can totally come to your question. Um, awesome. Oh wow, Mark from Australia. That's awesome. Good morning. Yeah. All right, so our next question, I will go to Shelley again. Think of a moment when someone from a different generation challenged the way you saw the world. If you can share with us the what, the how, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, this is another beautiful question. As I was reflecting on the work that I do in inclusive leadership, I was thinking about some of the work that I do within our union and the advocacy and really supporting our members who sometimes face bullying and harassment. And often I'm the only one who looks like me, the only Black person in the room. And so again, it's not just always the generational difference, but it's sometimes, again, if we look at things from an intersectional level, it's also racial, could be socioeconomic, could be a lot of other factors in them. And so I think about approaching one of the senior leaders and having one of those conversations on um, bullying and harassment and what were we going to do with the cases that were going on to handle it in a more restorative way. So, long story short, I've been supporting some members in some departments where there's been ongoing bullying and harassment from um, could be peer-to-peer, faculty members. And we're not talking about something that's just a one-off. We're talking about things that have been going on for years, right? So it could be 5 years plus. And working with members who are just raw and exhausted and feeling hopeless and just wanting light, wanting hope, wanting a possibility. And so I took it upon myself to just email the leader and say, like, we need to have a conversation. We need to think about how can we do things differently. And yeah, there's a generation divide for sure, because I'm looking at things from a more inclusive level. I'm steeped in inclusion, and when we say that, it's creating spaces where everyone can feel a sense of belonging. And if you're in an environment where people are targeting you for whatever the reason, sometimes it's usually just a breakdown of communication. How do you navigate that? And unfortunately, the systems are built not in a restorative way or not in an inclusive way. It's very much about this policy is this way, and it doesn't take the human heart-centered approach to it. And so for me, approaching this leader and saying, you know what, this is a situation, we have to do better. Um, I can name X amount of departments that are going through similar situations. And what are we as an institution prepared to do so that people are not calling in sick and taking time off because of the um, psychological safety that is lacking within the institution? And I was relentless with having multiple conversations over and over. It's not cured, it's not fixed, but you know, I think it's that idea of being willing to walk with that person, meet them where they are, and they may not see things. Because I remember having this specific conversation with this person who was fairly new to the institution. She'd only been there about 10 months, and she thought she had it all. She was aware of it all. And I said to her, no. I said, it's much deeper than what you see. I said, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on there. And if you allow me to guide you through and reveal some of the concerns, the issues, the traumas, we can hopefully be on the same page to work on things to heal the institution. That being said, also understanding that there are budgetary constraints that they have to deal with. But again, what can we do as an organization, as a group, to really move things forward? Long story short, um, it's interesting because we were also part of a pilot project with WorkSafe BC, where they were looking at organizations to ensure that they were more psychologically safe. And so we were part of that pilot, and the institution now has to comply with certain expectations, let's just say, of work safe, so that they can get up to speed. Because now it's not just me trying to get some of the leaders on board, but now we've got a regulatory body who's saying, like, yeah, you have to do better, right? So um, it's kind of, again, looking at where the person is, understanding the audience and walking with them and being curious to know what perspective they have, and and offering diverse perspectives if they're open to it. And this person really was. So that's what I wanted to share about that one.
I want to sit with the if they're open to it. That's
Yeah.
really important because sometimes we find ourselves spending so much energy, time, and resources trying to solve a problem where the other person is like blocked, nope, nope. And then at the same time, it gives us an opportunity to create the space, like you said, right?
Mhm.
To have these conversations, to go into it with willingness, you said willingness to understand. Um, that's very important. And is there that you also mentioned with the courage and repetition. Sometimes we have to have that same conversation multiple times before it clicks for the other person. So it does takes a lot of patience and persistence. Thank you. Thank you for that, Shelley.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go to Andrea. Do you want me to repeat it? You
I I I think I'm good. Thank you, Rasie.
You're welcome.
But I because I've been thinking about this. This is a wonderful question. Um, So when I think about intercultural communication, well, a little story about me. When I was about, I think when I was about 5 years old, I had a friend that came over, and a piece of my personality, my mom said, came out that I was teaching her something she didn't understand at school. Little did I know that's not a great social skill sometimes to have with trying to create friends. But what I've noticed with both my generation and my personality is we have a little bit sometimes a tendency, I'm a Gen X, tendency to want to tell and explain and say how things are. And I think sometimes this has worked really well for me as a leader and a boss because sometimes people really do want you to tell them how it works and what's going on. And so these are powerful skills. Nonetheless, I have children that are Gen Z, and you know, it doesn't work. And it doesn't just work because they're my children. It doesn't work because and this is a bit of a broad generalization, but I think this generation wants a sense of wants to feel respected. And I think when we don't respect them and see them as people that need to learn more, and maybe they should learn new things. I don't know, but that's not for me to decide because they're on their own path. And so something that I've really learned to do with both of my with my children and with youth and with young people is sometimes they'll say something, I'll think, oh, I know the answer to that. I think, no, I don't have the answer to that because it's not about my answer to them. I'm not trying to control them. I'm not trying to tell them what to do. I'm here to listen. I'm here to maybe support them if they want it. I could facilitate something, or I could simply be someone who's listening and has empathy and has care. And so this is a journey for me. But I do see that this is where we're going, and it's a more inclusive dialogue, and it's less about authority and a less about people that know and people that don't know. And I really like that it's trending in that direction. And I'm trying to think if there was another piece to that. There was, but I may have lost it.
That's
Oh,
okay.
I know what
How did it help you grow as a leader or a
yeah,
person?
it's
Yeah.
just being really respectful of people of all generations and that we always have something to learn. And I think what it was also with my daughter's friends that once I was more relaxed and just wanting to relate to them as people, not as younger people, suddenly they let me in. This is what I wanted to say. They let me in the door. They were like, "Oh, hey, we want to know all about you." And we went beyond these rules. We went beyond being, I'm the mom, you're the kids, you're this and that, or I'm the one in charge. And it became a much more connected, powerful experience. And suddenly I felt like I had new friends. So, I could be, and, they had become adults. So it was sort of appropriate, had to be appropriate, but I felt like I could really connect with them on another level. So, um, yeah, so that's something part I wanted to share.
I can feel how valued they feel with that approach, Andrea. It is, yeah, it's very important. And you got me thinking of the reverse with my dad. I am in a space where I really, really have to pause and ask questions instead of, no, that's not the way it is, right? It's and we get into it and then he gets warmed up and I get hot and then we're on different places where we don't want to be. Yeah, so I love the part of, being curious. I think for all generations, like having those conversations is we go into those conversations with curiosity. It can really set a level ground playing field, right? For everybody. Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful when we feel seen, heard, and understood for what it is we're trying to communicate, right? Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Just took me back in time there. All right, Rohene.
Yeah, as I was listening to Shelley and Andrea, I was just reflecting on another word that keeps shining through, and that is, the ability to be humble, right? And not humble in a sense of subservient, because I know sometimes that's the lens that can take, and that's not by all means where I want us to be. But more of humble in that we don't know what we don't know, and the more that we open ourselves up to it, the more that we can learn and then grow with others who are also, as you said, Rasie, who are open to it. And so yeah, I love that. For me, I had two examples that I was thinking of, but I'm just going to stick to this one, and that is um, as one of the very few women of color, and specifically Black women in my sector in a leadership role. And Shelley, you spoke about this, so thank you so much for allowing me to also kind of ride that theme. Uh, I spent a huge chunk of my time in my sector, starting leadership at a very young age. My first leadership role started at 19. And much of what I saw in terms of leadership was really a lot of leadership that was rooted in control and in power and in hierarchy and in playing the game. And so, fast forward a decade later, I figured out the game. I was playing chess, not checkers. I was, figuring out how to make those moves that were strategic and that allowed me to be able to move forward. Well, I think for many of us who are in leadership roles, or you've been in leadership for a long time, we also know that there is a shadow side of leadership. There's also the ugly side, I would say, of leadership, where we see the gossiping, the grapevine, the poking at each other, and before you know it, you're constantly in this defense mode. And that was what, honestly, much of my leadership was. So here I am. This was probably about 5, 6 years ago. I'm welcoming a new woman of color into her leadership role, and I'm supporting her and onboarding her in her leadership role. And I'm trying to give her all the wisdom that I had learned. I'm trying to, make sure that she doesn't, go through the same um, kind of like minefields that I went through, and I'm really just wanting to make sure that she has a pleasant experience so she doesn't have to learn and heal parts of what I had to learn. And so she comes to me and she says to me, Rohene, people are talking about you. And I look at her and I say, okay. And she says, and I defended you. And I said, and I looked at her and I said, you don't have to do that because that's not your responsibility. That's not your burden to bear. And she asked me why. And I said, well, you know what? You just got to choose your battles. Because I had learned to do that. I had learned, the gossip train, the grapevine. If you want to engage in it, fine. But for me, that's not my place or energy to fuel. And she, being Gen Z, me being millennial, and Andrea, I love that we're bringing in those parts of us as well. She said to me, "But if you don't confront the person and stand up for what you believe in, then why even call yourself a leader?" And that struck me because I thought up until then I was being strategic. I was choosing my battles. I was choosing not to engage. And yet, what was probably like being interpreted was that I wasn't as assertive, or I didn't actually address the battles that needed to be addressed. And so it just made me reflect in listening to her how important it is to stand up for yourself and stand up against the opinions of others, because what was being kind of shared down the grapevine about me was absolutely inaccurate and untrue. And it was actually related to a woman who was really jealous of me, who was spreading rumors about me. And it just, again, that was such an eye-opening moment for me, that I realized that yes, we're choosing battles, but there are some battles that are worth confronting and addressing, regardless of whether or not it's scary or not worth our time anymore.
Hmm. She was sent. Yeah, she was sent. Yeah. Wow. I'm just gonna pause with the stories that we've heard. Um, yeah, that's a very strong realization, Rohene. I'm putting myself like I'm literally just like sitting with you as you said you got struck with it. That's yeah, that's that's really awesome that she didn't stop there. Chat like, stood up for you and shared with you, hey, this is what you can do. And one thing that I know like from my different leadership roles in operations management is that we don't always have the answers, right? It's as long as we stay open and willing, Shelley shared with this with the willingness to learn, reflect and grow. We can do anything. Like there's limit we're unlimited to what is possible in our leadership roles, either it's in community, at home, or in the workplace. Thank you, Roheen. Does anybody have a question from the audience before we go into the next question that I have? And it's okay if you don't have one.
I just want to jump in and say, Roheen, thanks for sharing that. And as you were speaking, what resonated to me was the beauty of another woman of color supporting you. It was like that reciprocated experience. You were mentoring her. Your focus was like, how do I support her? How to mentor her? And she's like, wait, hold on, but without even saying it that way, like, but I need to let you know, and this is how I can support you because there's room for growth. And you were open to it. And I think that's so, like, I just, as you were speaking, I was like, yes, girl.
Mhm.
Ab Absolutely, Shelley. And can I just say, when we think of generational, like so much of my leadership was I needed to be the mediator. I needed to
Mhm.
protect my team. I needed to, push against this. And so to hear from somebody else say, yeah, but you need protection too.
Mm,
And
Mhm.
you don't need to have to always armor up, and you don't always need to be the one to say, you know, it's not a battle worth fighting for, I don't need my feelings to be hurt. When in reality, that's not the truth.
Mhm.
And that's why I think like with hard conversations where beneath, like when you peel the layers, right? If you really think about it, it's just two beings coming together to talk.
Yeah.
And once we start to strip that away and we come to that place, we meet each other in a very different place and different connection point in a crossroad. And so that's why I still call it an exciting and great place to be versus the scary big. And those are also valid too as well.
Mhm. We're humans, right? Leaders are humans. Yeah. It's kind of with what Andrea said earlier is seeing everybody as people instead of young and old, right? Um, yeah, I'm just reading Mark's comment here. Yeah, those are really great questions. Yes. Yeah, I think how we say it is very, very important. Is it with empathy? Is it with respect? Is it with curiosity? All right, we'll go to the next question.
Mhm.
And the last question. Okay, so if someone, okay, I'm going to start with you, Shelley. If someone walked away from today's conversation with just one belief about having hard conversations across cultures and generations, what would you hope that belief would be?
It's actually a bit of a question that I would ask the person to reflect on. And it's really about what, or a few questions in there. What is your end goal from the conversation? What do you want out of the conversation? As well as what's the legacy you want to be known for? Because we know people tend to remember how you made them feel rather than, of course, the words that were said. So when you walk into these conversations, my curious mind is, how do you want it to end? Like what's the goal out of it? Is it about I need to win, you need to win, or do you want to have a long-term um, relationship with that person? So that's one of the kind of thoughts, comments I would want folks to walk away with this conversation with today.
That
Um,
is so important. Sorry, Shelley, go ahead.
no, I wasn't sure if you wanted us to share a story or if we're just gonna leave
It's
it there.
it's up to you. It's
Okay,
up to
good.
you.
Good,
Please, yeah.
because I have have a story.
Oh my goodness, please, please. Always. And for Andrea and Rohene, you can start with a story,
Okay,
please.
cool.
I
Awesome.
want stories.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. Okay, so picture you just start working in an organization. You've been there for less than a year, and it's you're feeling excited. You're getting to know the lay of the land. Maybe it's been 6 months or so. You're still trying to figure out who's who in the zoo, and you notice, there's cliques going on, and you don't want to get involved in the politics of it all. And the supervisor makes a few off-the-cuff remarks that are ageist. Oh, you young people, you don't know about this and that and the other. A couple of comments. Oh, young people are always calling in sick, and people of my generation, we would just work. We never called in sick. Blah, da, 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 da. Those types of comments. You're like, what's going on here? And it's supposed to be a very inclusive environment. Um, they speak about that. So what do you do? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I took a moment, took a breath, took a beat, and had to think about, like, what was it about the conversation that didn't sit well with me? And I had to name it. And there was the ageism going on, and there was the diminishing of my circumstances, really just kind of brushing it aside. And then I decided, okay, I've assessed that. Now, what's the outcome? What do I want? Am I going to just let it pass? If I do let it pass, then this person may believe that they can speak to me any kind of way, which is not the case for me. Anyone who knows me knows that's not the case. So, as someone who really values strong communication and effective communication, one of the things I know to be true is to make sure that I set the table. And to set the table, what I did is I set a meeting invite. First, I think I spoke to the person, say, something that about our conversation a couple days ago didn't sit well with me, or the conversation that we had yesterday didn't sit well with me. I'd like to know if we could have a chat about it um, in the next day or two to check in. Because I know that there may be other stuff going on with that person that I'm not aware of. So let's see if we can find a time that works for everyone. They agreed. So I set an agenda with maybe 2 to 3, max 3 items, because there are a few things I wanted to discuss. And I put it right in the agenda, just bullet point, 1, 2, 3, one sentence each item, so that that person wouldn't be ambushed, so to speak, of like, what are we going to talk about? Because again, knowing that difficult or hard conversations can bring anxiety up for leaders and non-leaders and anyone. So put the agenda out there and had my little cue cards for myself or my little speaking points. Yeah, because I know sometimes when emotions come up for me, I can kind of freeze. That can be my default. And so I didn't want to get caught in that moment of freezing. It was important for me to have that conversation with this individual. So I had my cue cards, we had the agenda, And we started out in the conversation. And it was interesting because this was someone from a different generation, an older generation than myself. And I was very matter of fact. I said, when we were in our meeting a few days ago, you made a couple of comments. These were the comments. And when you said it, it didn't sit well with me. And it appeared to be kind of ageist. It appeared to be this, and it appeared to be that. I I don't know what your intention was behind the comments, but I'm curious about it. And the person just started crying. I wasn't prepared for that because again, I'm new. I'm a new kid on the block. But I held my own. It wasn't about their tears. It was about the conversation was about me being able to share my truth, my perspective, my reality. At the end of the conversation, I heard them, they heard me, and we had a beautiful relationship moving forward. Because again, I wanted them to know like we can have difficult conversations, and through those difficult conversations, there can be growth. There can be magic. There can be beauty. But it's to walk through those difficult conversations that, sometimes people just get stuck on the gate and don't want to walk through it. But once we walk through it, if both parties are willing and able and it's the right time, timing is key, everyone, timing is key, and just an open heart and that curiosity, it can really create again magic and change and beauty and again thinking about that legacy. What is the end goal that you want from that relationship, from that person? That's what I wanted to share there.
Mm, such a beautiful story.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. I love the energy that you bring with it as you sharing. It really fuels through. I felt it. I felt
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Um, and the one piece that I want to reiterate is that preparation piece, right? I think it can really it can set up us for, 100% of like what this is what we want to accomplish versus 10%, right? And there's a level of care that needs to go into it, especially, like we did a poll at the start and the fear of hurting the relationship, that was the top one for everybody in the room. I think it's really important to keep that in mind, as you said earlier as well, Shelley, heart-centered approach, right? Thank you. Andrea.
Yeah, this really brings up for me this idea of calling in or calling out.
Mm.
And I know earlier in my career as a leader, I was in a situation someone was making racist comments, homophobic comments, really I had to be outspoken. I just had to call it out. And it was a huge room. And it wasn't, but so sometimes I feel that you may have to speak out and you may have to call somebody out if that's your truth. And I had to. I realized afterward that I tried to repair it, but unfortunately, it created a divide in that relationship. And I don't know. I think there is some risk, and I think it is important to think about if you are going to have a difficult conversation, being being aware that there is some risk. At the same time, though, if you're not true to yourself and it's going to eat you inside, you got to decide for yourself what's important. And so I just kind of wanted to say that I've become more mature as a leader. I've become better at trying to not call people out. Um, Nonetheless, I think in some situations I still would. So if I had to, if it really felt against my values. And I think sometimes some people are are not necessarily going to continue in our connection. Nonetheless, that's probably a very small number. And I think with Shelley's story that I think the people you do invest in and you take the time and you call in behavior and not call out, you end up creating allies and connections and some beautiful heart-based relationships. And that's what evolved in my leadership and when I saw things that I thought were not appropriate or disrespectful. So um, Yeah, so that I'm glad some maturity kicked in. So,
Mhm.
but I still trust myself. If it's against my values, I'm probably going to say something. And I don't really care who
Mhm.
it is, whether that's someone, in a big senior leader. I'm going to
Yeah.
call it as I see it.
And that takes courage and bravery. And I think you need to do it to know the difference of this, like you said, calling up or calling, I call it calling up or calling out or calling in, right? I think it's important to keep that in mind that, and I love the values piece as well. I love that it's coming back to that with what's the intention here? Is it in alignment with my values? And the other piece that I wanted to share, just along with what you're sharing, Andrea, is does that person share my values? I think that's really important, not just with what my values are, but do they share my values? And I think if they don't, it's a different conversation. Maybe we have to start with values conversation, like why are we even having this conversation in the first place before having it?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And I used to think that I could be friends and close to everyone,
Mm,
but but
mm,
that's actually not true. And I'm not saying that that's what people should think or believe because I have such a big heart, but I've had to actually have boundaries and say, no, some people can't come close to my life because we share different values. But it's
mm,
very, very few people actually. But it is something I feel I've learned over time that I've needed to also protect myself. And I do think that's important.
mhm. And love them from far, and that's okay.
Yes,
Yeah, that's okay.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll bring it to Rohene, and then I'm going to open it up again to everyone in the room for any questions. Go ahead, Rohene.
Yeah, yeah, my heart is just like warming up with everything that is being shared and the collective wisdom. So I really appreciate Andrea and Shelley and obviously Rasie in terms of moderating. Yeah, it's really a heartwarming conversation. And for me, I leave everyone with what happens after the difficult conversation. For me, I ruminate. And for the longest time, would spend days on end going through the conversation, replaying it, rehearsing, what could I have said? What didn't I say? What I wish they would have said, what I wish they would have said, and differently, and over again. And I lose sleep. And before you know it, after days of rehearsing this conversation, probably 100 times, I arrive at shocker the same outcome. And and between the end of the conversation and the end of the rumination, I have not only lost sleep, I have gone through major negative self-talk, and I have found myself in the loop over and over again. And so as a coach, I've actually had to learn not only for myself to break that, but to help others break it at the same time. So if you are stuck in that rumination loop as well, here's three things that I offer you. The first one is the next time you have a difficult conversation, even if it's a tiny one, what I recommend that you do is create a rumination log, right? Journal all of those things. What was happening? What were some of the thoughts? What was the language that you were using? Because you'll start to identify a pattern. Secondly, start to then name the emotion. I often call this in my coaching practice, name it to tame it, name it to understand it, name it to reshape it. So when you can name the emotion, right, and really get granular about what's that emotion, the more likely you can start to see what is actually happening below the surface. Because rumination is actually just what's happening on the surface, but the loop is keeping you at this deeper unconscious level. And then the last step that you can do is just pick one piece of that rumination and just commit to at least, 5 to 7 days. I usually offer as your first kind of strategy that as soon as you notice it, try to break that cycle. So if you can say, okay, look, I'm in the cycle right now, I'm in the loop, this is what's happening. Either you need to come up with like a sound that can help you just be like, gotta break it. Or you set a timer and you say, okay, I'm only gonna ruminate on this for 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And what you'll do is over time, you build a habit of getting yourself out of rumination. Right now, I ruminate after a difficult conversation no more than 30 minutes, 30 minutes in total. And that's still a lot, right? That's 30 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. But I ruminate now for such a short window that by the time the 30 minutes is done, or I get to my 30-minute kind of, clock, I'm actually like, no, I'm done. I'd rather do better things. And I actually enjoy coming out of the rumination. And sleep, nobody messes with my sleep anymore. So certainly rumination is not going to change that. I hope that helps somebody today.
Ooh, that's a great way to raise self-awareness and build discipline. Thank you, Rohene. That is such a great way to wrap up our questions. Thank you. Very actionable steps. All right. Okay, let's see here if there's any questions. I'm just gonna give it a few seconds here. Let's see. Oh, Alpha made a comment. Oh yeah, it is. And I know the other thing too that's very common with the stories that we've heard from Shelley, Andrea, and Rohene is that it is a journey, right? We're not experts at it, but we're willing to have the conversation. We're willing to learn. We're willing to go beyond the surface and have long-term relationships like Shelley shared, right? It's not just about right now, and that other person needs to be willing as well. So and I think we talked about choosing our battles. Rain mentioned that, and I think especially for leaders, and we're leading different teams and managing different projects, it's important that Andrea said with people, right? See people as humans. As you're planning to have these hard conversations, remove the title and then see how you can have a different approach with more ease and respect and kindness. Um, and Mark said something as well.
Yeah, can I quickly address that,
Yeah, for
Rasie? I
sure.
know Mark's not here, but I address it because whenever it's put in collective space, it's always good to generate a collective response. Um, Here's something that I think is really important. Mark raises the question of wouldn't it be better if we just don't ruminate at all? And the reality is rumination is actually a human behavioral instinct.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a natural part of being human is for us to take time to reflect. And there's a functional purpose for it. Where it becomes dysfunctional is when you're stuck in the loop and you can't get out. And so, I appreciate Mark's perspective of, why don't we just not ruminate at all? Biologically, we're not wired to just do that. So to get rid of something that is innate is probably not in our best interest, given the way that our brains work and our cognitive disposition. However, the goal, and I think that's the goal that for when you look at healing on a continuum, is everything has a functional and a dysfunctional purpose. And so part of always remembering at one point is something not serving you. And if it's not serving you, there's an opportunity to break the cycle. So I just offer that for everyone who might also be reflecting on, could I just stop rumination? If you can and you figure that out, let us know.
Dance,
However,
please.
yeah, however, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely, yeah, I'm with you. I have books and journal in different places you got to process that. Yeah, you gotta, yeah, 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 yeah. I can't even imagine. I'm just like getting all uncomfortable just imagining with not having that. Thank you so much, Marine, for responding to that. My last words for you. So before you do exit, when you do leave the meeting, there will be a survey that will pop up. Please let me know how we did because we want to improve. And also one of the questions is what leadership topic do you want us to have a conversation about maybe next year, maybe at the end of this year? I think that would be really great information based on what you've heard today. Maybe it's a continuation. I want to know what it is that you want us to talk about and also how we can improve. And I'm leaving this with you. I invite you to go for it. Prepare yourself for the conversation. Share your intention and stay open to what unfolds. You absolutely got this. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Rohene. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Marlo. Thank you, Salvador, Parley, Alpha, Paul, and Yusoro. Thank you so much for joining us. And Andrea, Rohene, and Shelley, if you can stay back, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.